Are you looking to expand your mind? Do you like to challenge and be challenged? Looking to improve yourself and share your experiences professionally and personally? You're in the right place. Welcome to Scoutcast, Roasting Marshmallows, with your host, Rolf Surd.
All right, we are live. Welcome to another episode of Scoutcast. My name is Rolf Surd and I'll be your host. So today we have someone special on the podcast. He's the originator of mob programming, a whole team approach to teamwork in software development. And he co-wrote the book actually on mob programming, and he frequently speaks on this topic at conferences and user groups and meetups all over the world. And today I guess he can add a podcast to that list, although he may have spoken in other podcasts as well that I'm unaware of, but we'll see.
Not this one, Rolf, not this one.
Not this, that's true actually, yeah. His passion is working with teams to reinvent the workplace, to make it possible for everyone to excel in their work and in their life. And he believes that we can always find a way to improve by rapidly taking countless continuous tiny steps in the direction of better. The accumulation of these tiny steps lead to many wonderful things. So we're taking a similar approach in creating and continuously improving this very podcast. So, I guess one of these wonderful things that come with these tiny steps to better is that this man is now a guest in this very episode. So allow me to introduce to you Woody Zuill. Do I pronounce that correctly, Woody?
Very close. You could say Zuill.
Okay.
That's a little bit more. So Zuill, like cool. Hey, that's cool. It's Zuill.
Okay. Well, thanks. Welcome to have you here. So you're from San Diego, California, right? So what time is it for you right now while recording this?
It's 6 a.m.
So did you get up early just for this podcast?
No. So I usually get up at about 5 a.m. unless I have something, an engagement in Europe or something I need to be up for earlier. But I have a long history in my life of getting up early because I owned little businesses when I was younger. And so, I would get up early to make sure everything was lined up and ready to go by the time the employees started showing up. And really, the journey that we're on and that we're talking about today started with me realizing that why should I have to get in early to make sure everything's ready for everybody? Maybe they can do that themselves. Yeah. And so that was part of where I started realizing we don't need to manage people. We don't need to be a micromanager at least. That people can figure stuff out. You just need to have an environment where they can figure it out. So it's a good thing you brought that up.
And so San Diego, actually I've been to California once in my life, but I've never visited San Diego, but I should have, because I always said to myself like that, if I'm going to live in California, it's probably San Diego because I'm a huge skateboarding fan. So Andy McDonald and Tony Hawk, I think, are two heroes of mine, and they're actually from San Diego. So I don't know if you skateboard or have skateboarded in the past, but
so I don't now. But when I was a kid, we lived out in the countryside where everything was dirt.
Okay.
There was nothing to skateboard on. But whenever I visited my cousin up in Los Angeles, everything is paved.
Yeah.
And so they got into that very early. Skateboarding, I think, started in the 50s or something, but in the 60s in California, it really started taking off. So I got to do it a little bit, and I surfed a little bit, but no, not like you would consider skateboarding. Yeah, what a wonderful sport!
Yeah, I love it, man. It's pretty cool.
I don't know. I always found it a bit weird somehow. Never managed to get into it.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll be that good at it for some weird reason.
So let me just quickly. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to quickly introduce my two other guests here. They're regulars on the show so far, so I don't think we need to do a very long introduction here. But we got Henk, of course, here. I think you've only managed to miss 2 or 3 episodes so far, so looking good. And Sylvester, of course.
It's not looking good, but that's okay.
Come on, man.
I just wanted to say one little thing. It's Sylvester's birthday today, so congratulations, Sylvester.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
So I'm glad that you could take some time out of your busy day to join the podcast here.
I like having this conversation. I'm looking forward to it, actually. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So I guess a little focus today would be mob programming, although I don't think it's going to be everything mob programming related. Who knows? We might even be talking about no estimations or anything like that. I don't know. We'll see where this goes. But Woody, could you maybe take it away and explain what mob programming entails for anyone that doesn't know?
Yeah, that's a good starting spot. So, we usually picture programmers as being very focused on something, working alone, at a computer. The traditional view in movies and TV shows of a programmer is someone working in their basement, or they're working alone. And for the first 15 years of my programming, I always worked alone. I didn't have anyone else to work with. I was writing software for a little company that I owned, and there wasn't someone, I didn't have a bunch of programmers to call on, so I worked alone. And I didn't even know there was a way to work with more than one person programming. The computers themselves are built so that you do solo work. That's the way kind of computers are made. You sit at a keyboard, and the way you communicate with the computer is through the keyboard. So after about 15 years, I was introduced to pair programming. Let's see, it would have been, so I started programming in 82 or 83. So somewhere in the later 90s, I heard about pair programming. So I found somebody who could pair program with me. That's two people sitting at one computer, looking at the screen. It's done there's many different styles of it, or more than several styles. But when you're sitting at the computer with someone else, it's two brains focused on one task or one problem. So mob programming grew out of that. So by the late 2000 decade, I was starting to experiment with more than one person. I'd had several engagements or projects we were working on where we had more than one person sitting at the computer. Usually it'd be a tester, a developer, someone who could write code, and a business analyst is what we used to call in the company I was at. So there's three people sitting at the computer all at the same time. Now, we didn't do that a lot or enough, but that gave me a taste for this. In 2011, I was working in a place where we started working, picture not two, not three, but 5 or 6 or 7 people all sitting at one computer. You're not using 5 different screens necessarily. You've got one screen everybody's looking at. Now, you might have multiple screens, so you can have a lot of stuff showing at the same time, like your development environment on one screen and your database on another, and maybe even your running application, maybe it's a website, running on the third. And you can all see it all at the same time. So that's the basic idea, I like to say, is all the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time and in the same space.
And why is that a good thing?
Add on to it that. Yeah, and why is that a good thing? Well, remember, we're all working at the same computer, and here's what we get. It took me several years with the team talking about it and thinking about it, because people would always ask me this question: how can you be effective with 5 people at one computer? And my answer almost always was, I don't know, we just are. So it's like, I'm not a scientist. I didn't research this. It's just something we started doing. It was sort of accidental that we started doing it. So, but as we thought about it, why is this such a benefit? And so first of all, the benefits are we were getting a lot more done. It was of much higher quality. We were learning a lot, and we were enjoying ourselves. Enjoying ourselves included that we were more engaged during the day, that we were not worn out at night. It wasn't fatiguing to us. It was less fatiguing than working alone. It actually was a lot of fun. So anyways, this was the benefits we were getting. So how did that happen, or how were we getting those benefits? I think it's because we take advantage of several different kinds of flow. So in software development, we often think of being in the zone.
Yeah.
An individual programmer is looking at the screen alone. They got headphones on. No distractions, please. They put a sign on the door. It's like, unless there's a fire or you've brought food, don't interrupt me. Right?
Now my wife is going to listen to this podcast. I need to
that.
explain this. Yeah.
So when I worked alone, and even working in another company, and somebody would come into my room or in my cubicle and ask for me to help them on something, they're distracting my attention. And all of a sudden, I've lost the context I was in. I have to move into another context. So with mob programming, we're able to keep in the same context with all the people that we're working with, and we get a different kind of being in the zone. So while I think that we get this individual psychological flow is what the official term for it is. While we get that, because we are in control of ourselves, we can leave the team at any time. Nobody's forced to sit with the team. They decide for themselves, is this appropriate for me to do right now? And then, so they can go and think alone or go take a walk or whatever it is that helps them think better. But when they come back with the team, they've got their ideas, and now we enter a kind of team flow. So the difference between an individual flow and the team flow is really how many people are involved in this flow nature.
Would it be like comparable to like a musical group or something like this? That they are just basically playing different instruments and somehow they get to this flow probably?
Yeah, so I can relate to that really closely because when I was younger, from about age 17 to about 27 or 8, I attempted to make my living as a musician. And when you are a solo musician, you can do certain things. But when you start performing with a group, you have to pay attention to all the contributions of everybody. So if you're a solo performer with some backup musicians, you might just think that they're there to support you, but it has to go in both directions. Some of the best music, the most engaging music is done with way more than 2 or 3 people, sometimes with dozens and maybe 100 or more. So it's very similar to playing with a musical group. It's also similar to playing in a team, like a team sport. If you were to have a team playing, let's say, soccer or football, whatever, you've got this team, but you like to work solo. So you're the only one on your team, but there's 8 people or 12 people or whatever on the other team. You're not going to win in that situation. So when we're in a team sport, we really are focused on how can I best contribute. Now you may be the star, but you still have to know how to contribute rather than just, imagine if the best soccer player on your team was, let's say, I don't know what you call them in Europe, but a center forward, but they also like being goalie and they like being the back, and they like making goals. So they're running up and down the field all the time, doing every position. That team would never win. So this is the thing with mob programming. It's like a musical group. It's like it's like a surgical team sometimes. All the different ways of working as a team, you can incorporate parts of that into. It's really just about collaborating.
So, all these teams that you're describing now, like a surgical team or a football team, or, they all have one goal in mind, one priority, right? Like win the match or save the patient. But what you see in work a lot of the times is that like managers or product owners say like, we don't have one priority, we have 3 priorities at the moment. Like, how would you deal with something like that? Like, should you tell them like, oh, just pick one? Or, how would you solve that kind of issue?
So there's this extremely difficult situation in software development for managers because they believe this needs to be managed. And when we use that term to say we got more than one thing working, we would say multitasking. So I've seen job descriptions where it says must be able to multitask, which is basically saying must be able to destroy your ability to work well, right? So we're asking someone to do something that is going to actually harm their ability to work well rather than increase their ability to work well. So just knowing that we have this multitasking thing going on, that's telling us we have this misplaced focus in our management. That they think that's actually useful or important is probably wasteful. Yeah. Anytime, matter of fact, I'll tell a quick story. I was working in a place, they had hired me to just be a developer. This was back in 2003, I think. And I was there for 5 or 6 years. They hired me to be a software developer, but almost immediately I could see some of the things they were doing were good, but some of them weren't so good. And this was during the period of my career where I was learning how do you emphasize and get more of the good and let the not so good things just disappear. And so I was watching for opportunities to do that. And the overall problem of the place was that they were trying to do way too much stuff. And I spent a lot of time figuring out how to automate for myself some of those things so I didn't need to spend, divert my attention while I was working. So I'm not really sure. The whole story I want to tell there would probably take too long for what we're
You
doing.
said it was short.
To condense it, yeah. So to condense it, it was basically the start for me of figuring out how do we collaborate to get things done. How do we focus on one thing? This is about flow. So we started talking about flow. We have the psychological flow, but we also have this lean flow. So the psychological flow can be a team or it can be an individual. There's ways to get that, and there's been research, a lot of research done on that. But we can also have this lean flow. And in lean manufacturing, flow is the basic idea of flow is to have a single piece be produced from start to finish without interruptions, without inventory. And those interruptions, they would call it waiting. Without the waiting and without the inventory. Both waiting and inventory are waste. So waiting basically increases our cycle time, the amount of time it takes to get something done on the calendar. So we have the idea of work time. The work time is the time we're actually spending doing the work that will end up producing this thing. But the cycle time includes all that waiting time. And it's the big waste at that particular company. The biggest thing I noticed was so much time was wasted waiting to work on something. So we'd start on something, and then we'd need to wait for a meeting for the next decision about the thing to be done, or to get a question answered about the thing. I did a value stream map there. It's the first place I really started getting serious about the value stream map, where you draw a map, it's a line, and you draw this line where when you're working well, you just draw it here, and then when you're not working, you drop down and you're waiting for something, and you draw a line down below. And then you're working again, you got the answer, you go up and you draw the line there. It just is a way to record how much time did we actually work on this, and how much time increased it that was increasing our cycle time. And when you can identify those things, you can start thinking about, well, how do we get rid of them? Or my reverse opinion is, or point of view is, how do we focus on turning up the time that we're actually working?
Yeah.
So I think I went off topic just a little bit there,
good.
but to bring this back to mob programming, we go from start to finish without the inventory and without the waiting. If we can accomplish that, no matter how we do it, it doesn't matter if it's mob programming, we're going to get the big benefit. You know, you probably read the book. I'm going to swing around and see if it's here. I always keep this book nearby. I used to buy extra copies because they would disappear off my desk when I was working. Now when we're working from home, the things stay where you put them. But anyways, this book from Donald Reinertson, The Principles of Product Development Flow, he doesn't pay me to show this book, but there we go. So this is the idea. He writes about all these different aspects. If something can go directly from start to finish without interruption, then you reduce the cycle time, because the big waste of having these queuing and inventories is that our cycle time grows, and that introduces flaws, that introduces variability, that introduces all kinds of things. So if we can identify that and get rid of it, we will get a benefit. So you asked about managers who are going to say, well, we want to multitask. Well, the best thing probably to do is stop overloading people and limit the work in progress. Limit it down to one piece at a time. Mob programming practically does that.
But still, the perception is there that like splitting up the work across multiple people is going to make the work get done faster, and like it's really hard to, at least I find it really hard to convince them, like, no, if we do it all as a team, from start to finish, it's going to be more efficient in the end, or at least, like you said, more time spent working on the stuff. And I don't know, it's really hard to get it across.
I think it's also like they compare, because we had the workshop with Woody last year, right, about a year ago, and we tried mob ourselves, and at least the things that I noticed was that also about shortcuts. If you are with a mob, you don't take them anymore. If you are alone, you tend to take a little bit of shortcuts here and there. So I found like, that was very beneficial. But I think trying to answer that question for me was also like, I think if you're going to be moving rocks from one side to the other, probably if you do this in parallel with a lot of people, that's going to work. But I think when the subject is about thinking and making decisions and making choices, and then I think this parallelization actually makes it worse, because I guess becomes what I think Woody is saying, right? Like it gets waiting time. But then my question also on the top of that, so just to add it, another question on Drove is, what if you don't have all these skills necessary on your mob? You're going to still have the same waiting time or not?
Yeah, that's very true. So to make it clear, a team working together, I want to see all the skills on that team. So if all the knowledge and skills are represented by what the people on the team know, are on that team, then they don't need to go off the team to ask a question. They don't need to go off the team. So this is understanding how do we eliminate the cycle time or the wasted time, and we do that by making sure we set things up so that it disappears. So you can do mob programming with more with all people with the same skill. You're going to get a certain amount of learning still going on. You'll probably get to very much better solutions and so on. But my preferred way of thinking of it is that we will have all the skills and knowledge that we need working together. So if we gather that together, we go directly from start to finish, but we get the big bonus of having all those different points of view on the code, on the thing we're creating at the same time. One of the big things from I think why Agile software development came into being is because the people who were talking about this back in the late 90s, the idea of what's not working in the way we've been doing this phased approach. And one of the things I think they noticed is everybody's separated by time, even if they're working on the same thing. The people, where the inception of the program comes from, they do that way at the beginning. And then some people do some analysis, and maybe they start gathering requirements. Each one of those phases we would go through was done by people separated by time from the next bunch. So eventually, let's say after 4 or 5 phases, we get to where we're writing code. Now, code is now just a tiny part of this much bigger project. And yet we thought, now we got to micromanage. We've got to that point, everybody's got to be, we got to really focus on, like you were saying, we're parallelizing the work. We think that can be a benefit because we've got to the point where, hey, it's just writing the code now. But I would argue this, it's in the writing of the code, it's in the doing of the work that we discover the work that we must do. Up to that point, it's all theoretical. Unless we're writing stuff that we've already written many times. And if we are, why are we doing that? Because software is about writing something that you can use over and over and over. So if we're so familiar, this brings us into the Cynefin domains. Like, what domain is software development? If you don't know Cynefin domains, there's basically 4 that we pay most attention to. There's a couple others that they talk about, but you have what they call the clear domain or simple domain. They have the complicated domain, the complex domain, and chaos. For your listeners who don't know about it, look up a couple YouTube videos and get familiar with it. It's a good thinking tool. If we don't understand the domain we're in, then we will try to solve our problems using techniques that probably work in a different domain. So we want everything to be simple. So there are things that we can turn from being, because software is sort of in the complex domain. There's things we can do to move stuff into the complicated or simple domains, or clear domain, they call it now, I think. But overall, the process, so to say it quickly, simple means there are no unknowns. It is kind of like I'm going to make breakfast and, I just pop the toast in the toaster, crack some eggs, and, it's the same thing every time you do it. You move into the complicated, there's some stuff to figure out. You kind of know what the unknowns are. Like if you're going to cook, so if you're just going to cook eggs and toast or whatever, there are no unknowns, but you might, let's say, move to where you're making a very high quality croissants and dishes that need to be watched closely as they, rise or whatever it is that, complicated food does. But you know what to watch for. Is the oven too hot or too cool? You need to know today, what's the humidity like? You need to know what's the temperature in the room because the food's going to react. That stuff. So it's unknown, but the unknowns are known. But you move into the complex space, and the unknowns are not known. So they call that the unknown unknowns. So this is where software development happens. Whenever we can move something to the complicated space that we do, or to the simple, that means, can we automate this thing? If we're writing the same stuff over and over again, we're wasting our time. Matter of fact, if you're doing software development, by definition, you're not just doing the same, like it's not a web page that just has different pictures than the next web page you're making. Like if you're making a bunch of web pages, you just slapping pictures into it, that's not really development.
Yeah.
But boy, if you start putting e-commerce on this thing or whatever they call it nowadays, and you're trying to do stuff that's real development, all bets are off.
And so I was wondering, because you mentioned that the mob, you should have all the disciplines in there for it to be truly effective. So let's say you have a team of developers and testers, but for some reason the product owner says like, okay, it's a developer party, I don't need to be there, I need to talk to these people to get my requirements clear. So does that work?
Well, so yes. So any collaboration you can do is an advantage. If we can get really good at collaboration, that will benefit us a great deal more than getting good at breaking work apart so that you can individualize the work. So collaborating is good anytime we can get it. Let's focus on getting good at collaborating. However, the world isn't perfect usually in our workplaces, and we can't have the whole team together. But when we don't, we will start recognizing the bottlenecks. What happened for us when we first started mob programming, we noticed all of a sudden we were getting a lot more done in the amount of time we had to work. And we started working full time together, 8 hours a day, and never more than 8 hours a day. That was one of the guidelines I brought with me there. It's like, we don't work overtime. Any manager who believes that, we got a deadline, everybody's got to work more, later hours, more hours. I don't know if that happens to you in Europe.
Sometimes.
Here in the U.S., it's kind of a standard thing you'll see. Yeah. And what happens when you do that is the work quality goes down, and it's actually going to take you longer to get the work done, or you're going to deliver junk. And so we don't really, so then you need to work harder and harder. This is the idea between working smarter and working harder. We can circle back to that if you want to, because I think that's an important part of the whole concept. Here's the thing. When we start working together, we noticed that we were going really directly from start to finish on the things we were working on, unless we had a question for the product owner. Now, it turned out there were, I think, 4 different roles represented that had been now identified as our big bottlenecks. The first one we noticed was the product owner. So the product owner not being in the same room, not being engaged with the team, really slowed us down. So we could work really quickly when we were working on stuff that we could answer our own questions, and now we had to get with the product owner, and we had to send them a note. So first you send them a message, then you send them an email, and pretty soon, you don't know how to even contact them because they're not answering the email, they're not answering the messaging. Well, they're in a meeting somewhere. So I would say this, I think the product owner as a role is misunderstood.
Okay.
The whole team is a product owner. And when we think that it's an individual, we're probably...
too detached or something as a team.
Yeah, so we've thought that this, we should divide the work up, when I think kind of what we need to do is turn it into a collaborative effort. There were 3 other roles. One we noticed was our database of people at the company were on a different team. So that means that they weren't really in the group of developers. They were in the group of database people. Same thing with testers. Testers were not originally officially on our team. They were in their own department. So there's 3 right now. The 4th one was the people who would deploy the applications. They were in a different department. So the worst thing you can do to a team is put people in different departments, because now you have to deal with the structure of their department. You've all heard of Conway's Law. We're imposing this model of management on the creation of the software, and a lot of bad things can happen. So to really make it clear, once you get rid of the bottlenecks or the waste introducing waiting for the team itself, you start recognizing there's some even bigger ones outside of there. And now we can start working on that. And what we ended up doing, this idea originated, is the product owners were given more, I would say, they became full-fledged members of the team. They're first-class team members. They're not outside the team. Well, how do you get them involved? In the work area that we had, we actually created a room where they could sit and be alone if they wanted to, but they were within quick access with the team, so we didn't have to go across the company to go find them. But actually, they start recognizing that themselves. The quicker they could answer questions for us, the quicker they got their work done, and the better the work got done. And now I believe all those roles are on the teams. All the roles I just described, besides what we would consider traditionally developers, they're really all developers. They're part of a master brain of development, and when we bring them on the team, we get rid of that waiting. So yeah, how do I convince, I want to really make it clear, I don't know how to convince managers that they should change the way they do things, and I would even argue that convincing people is probably not a good path to take. What had happened for us was things started getting better once we started working this way, and people wanted more of that better, and how can we get more of that better? So it's a long-term deal. You don't do it instantly. You don't change somebody's mind by explaining to them how this thing works.
So where does a team stop, right? Because you're saying, well, the product owner is in there, and DBAs, I get that, right? But it's still all rather technical. So would you also bring your customer to this team, right? In a bit of the XP practices?
So I would say so. That is the best experiences we had was when we were involving customers. Now, I would argue, though, if your company does not have those customers internal, it could become a little bit more difficult. So maybe this is more theoretical.
I'm saying customer, but where does it stop? Because for me, a team is actually all the people that are focused on solving one particular outcome, right? On achieving a business outcome.
Yes.
And so if you just bring the product on, I think you need more people, right? You need the rest of the company to be involved. So do you bring them in the same room? How do you tackle this?
So we actually did that. Yeah, that's an interesting point. On the most critical applications that were of a larger size that we worked on, we always attempted to very rapidly round trip with what we would call the customers. They wouldn't sit with us all day, every day, but we tried to get as much time. With one project, they would sit with us about an hour a day, and these were the actual end users, which we would call maybe the customers. But there's like 6 or 7 customers we can identify. The person who's paying for the project is a customer. The person who is going to be in charge of maintaining it could be thought of as a customer. In other words, it gets installed at their company or whatever, and then this person's, their job is to make sure it runs smoothly and communicate back with the people who delivered the software to them. I think other customers could include the boss of the person who's going to be using the software. Yeah. They didn't order the software. They didn't say that we need this software, but they're going to manage the people that are using the software. So there's all these different angles, and we forget about most of them. We forget about, we think the person using it might be, or the person paying for it might be our customer. But, boy, think of in the old days, the person installing it at the customer site. Let's say there's 2,000 computers they're going to install this software on. And those aren't all configured exactly the same. Each computer has got its own hardware, its own software that's supporting everything that's working on the computer. That can be a huge chore at a firm where in the old days, where you had to actually physically go and install this software. We've automated a lot of that now, and we put it on the cloud and all that kind of stuff that sort of gets rid of that. But still, all of those could be thought of.
I'm too young, man. I haven't experienced that.
Yeah, so I'm too old. I experienced the stuff that came before that.
I still use floppies.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and I worked at a place in 1974 that was actually inventing the process of making floppy drives.
You have the punch cards.
They were actually this was in those days. You had hard drives that started. I think they started actually using them maybe back in the 50s, but they were always custom made, and then they started figuring out how to manufacture them for these big users of them. That's way before my time. I wasn't, certainly not working at this time. And so when we come into this modern world that we have right now, software, it's like the old saying, software development and software use is where it is because, it's the way it is because the way it was. Every step we've taken along the way, can you imagine, is it Moore's law that like the memory or processor speed doubles every 2 years? if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be thinking about this stuff.
And so,
because the hardware itself drives how quickly things happen or can happen. We need to become, more fluent in our work so that we can keep up with how fast the hardware has moved.
So, we've been talking about mob programming for a while, and about like the benefits and like the good things it can bring you. But are there also any drawbacks that you can identify? Like, are there any negative points about it?
Well, there's a lot that can go wrong when you're trying to collaborate with people. I've seen it like in school, on the schoolyard, we're all playing on the same, this team is playing against that team, and you think you're combating, or you're in this kind of a competition with the other team, but people on the team, they also, hey, I had that play and you stole it from me. Like if you're playing baseball, you got your glove up in the air to catch the ball, and somebody runs in front of you and they catch the ball. So now you're mad, and you're gonna yell at them, and so this is sort of the thing. It's like human nature can kind of get in the way of us collaborating, and I would argue that collaboration is good almost always. Now, we need to have the time to think alone. So mob programming doesn't eliminate the time of thinking alone that we need. Or I would say that even the time not thinking about this at all. Because I think there's enough research that shows that if you focus on something very, very diligently, you may never come to the solution you need to have. You need to give your own brain time away from the problem. Like they would say, we got to sleep on this. So one of the problems can be that we think we need to be together working as a team all the time. But each individual should take control of their own thought
learning
process. And and leave the team when they feel they need to leave the team. I've watched teams, I've visited now hundreds of teams working this way. I've watched teams that will gather in the morning, maybe with their product owner, because the product owner is not
available the whole time.
Available the whole time. So they talk with the product owner. They work together with them for maybe an hour as a whole team, and then the product owner goes off at this particular company. They would go to their own little area that was sort of in the center of all the developers, so they have easy access. Then they start working, and somebody will say, "I'm going to split off and do this little part, and because I can just get it done quickly." And we don't need to. So they go and do that. Or maybe they say, let's split into 2 or 3 pairs so that we can attack this from different directions. Or you take care of this mundane part, we'll take care of that mundane part. We don't have the whole team together to do the boring work. Of course, I would always argue, if you have boring work, automate it, get rid of it, don't do it anymore. If managers are going, hey, we don't need 5 people on this, well, why are you doing it? So figure out how to not have to do it anymore. That's important. That would be considered maybe the part of the job of management, is realizing we're doing a lot of things we don't need to do. Let's get rid of them. Anyways, So am I kind of answering that? There's one of the problems. Another problem is, so human nature itself makes things difficult for us. We need to learn how to interact better on a team. So I've worked with some people who just seemed naturally really good at teamwork. I personally am in certain realms, but not in others. So I had to learn a lot of skills and techniques of teamwork that I brought in from other kinds of work I had done in my life to programming. Because we picture, like we started here, we picture a programmer as working alone. The first 15 years of my life, I only solo programmed, or of my programming career. And then as I moved into pair programming, I could only do it sometimes because a lot of companies either didn't allow it, or it was hard to find somebody to pair with. But that became my preferred way of working. It wasn't until I've been programming then almost 30 years or so till we stumbled upon this idea of mob programming. So it's like, this doesn't replace pair programming. It doesn't replace solo programming. It introduces another way of working. But so another problem I've noticed quite a bit with mob programming is that we don't have a technique that we use that allows the whole team to collaborate well. And the one that we adopted, which I adopted for my pair programming long before mob programming, I learned from Llewellyn Falco. And when I worked a short while with Llewellyn Falco on some open source stuff, he used this technique. I became fascinated with it and adopted it as my preferred way of pair programming. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. Because one of the primary problems of pair programming was the person with the idea takes the computer, and now they're locked in their own brain, and they're putting the code in, and we call it code for a reason, I think. It's like it's so cryptic, nobody can understand it. And so we're coding, and so that means we're taking a big idea and turning into little snippets of the idea. And as we put it in, it slowly grows. And the other person who's pairing with us is trying to figure out what's this guy doing. And they might even say, can you explain to me where we're going with this? And there's this kind of universal response of the person at the keyboard, because they're so focused on what they're doing, they don't want to be interrupted. Just a second, you'll see. And they even put up your hand like you indicated there. They go like this. And I actually did this myself when I was working with a trio team many years ago. We had signals that we would use to indicate, so we wouldn't have to distract ourselves. Like, you'll see in a minute, or really it was like, I'm going down a deep thread, don't interrupt me. We would tell each other that by signals. So here's the thing. Sometimes somebody will just sit at the computer and start doing stuff, and we eliminate the collaboration because they're trapped in their own mind. The other people aren't being brought along. So this one little guideline really was the start of it for me. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. That requires learning to collaborate well, which takes at least 3 aspects of it. We have to start learning to explain our ideas, that we're used to kind of growing in little steps. We need to grow it in little steps with the whole team so that we get the power of all those brains. So we need to start being able to explain ourselves. I like the whiteboard for that. We go to the whiteboard, we put the main idea up there. Another little technique is we can break it down into, human spoken language. First we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. And then we can start trying it. So that's one of the things. We also need to learn to listen. Listening does not just mean letting the other person speak. Often good ideas take 3 or 4 sentences to say, and we might have 3 or 4 ideas that we need to bring together here. So if we're just waiting for our opportunity to say our thing, we're not going to really hear what the other person's saying. And the last thing that I think is really critical is that we be willing to try other people's ideas without criticism or without
That is the hardest.
That is very hard to do. And when we get good at it, it means we're going to go down a lot of rabbit hole paths, but it also means we're going to discover a lot. And software development, well, if I could leave this podcast with one fundamental idea, software development is a process of discovery. And if it's not, we're not really doing development. So if we're doing software development, we need to discover things, and we need to find ways to expose as many different possibilities as possible. So the team that just has somebody at the keyboard, they're coding, everybody's just watching, we probably have lost the ability.
So I have a question on this. Like, how do you see, I think normally when you try to help teams and implement mob programming for them, or help them to go to, use this technique, I think the most common question is okay, how do I deal with if I just need to search for a framework things and reference, and you just Googling it, copying code in Stack Overflow. Sometimes it feels a bit troublesome, every 10 minutes rotating. And it's how do you see that?
So the discovery process doesn't mean we're writing code right now. So we're going to change our model of working while we're looking stuff up. So we would do it in 3 or 4 different ways. The most common was...
Sorry, we seem to be having a technical difficulty. Rolf, I think you're using the wrong mic. We're hearing an echo now and a lot of white noise in the background. Rolf doesn't hear us. Oh, he's gone. That fixed it as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so sorry.
So...
Sorry.
Let's get... can you refresh my memory? I was in the middle of
exactly. So the question was more about when we are trying to solve a problem in a framework or something, we do a lot of Google or Stack Overflow and copy and paste, and then sometimes with the mob it feels a little bit people is Google this or go there, and then it just feels like maybe a hassle. I think that if you are just on your own computer, at least my perception, it feels it goes quicker if I do this by myself.
So there's no reason to not do that by yourself, right? So as a team, we should be reflecting my ideas at least daily on what's working and what isn't working. So if we're going, that seems to take a lot of time, that we could be moving a lot quicker during that part. Let's try some things. And one of the things we would often do, so the first thing is several people on the team are anticipating, it looks like we're going to need to know about this. And they all have their own computers there as well. We've got the main computer through which all of our work is going, but we have our other laptops and phones and whatever devices. You could be looking up stuff while we're doing mock programming solo. You can be solo looking at this thing. And as you discover things, you can say, hey, there's something here we probably need to look at in a minute. We don't want to distract the team from what they're doing. We put it in the parking lot. That's something we're going to discuss in just a minute. This can also work as a team. We could all say, let's just break up, and we're sitting together. Just everybody open your computers, search on where you can find the best ideas, try a few things, and then what we would do is we'd message them to the main computer, and the person sitting there would bring them up. So there's 2 ways to do it right there. We had 4 or 5 ways of doing this. Another one is learning together is a huge value to us. So the learning process is important to have happening.
Yeah.
So that means as a team, the learning process it may feel painfully slow, but we can get a much more complete learning process because we've got all those different viewpoints.
Yeah.
The person doing the database stuff will have a different viewpoint from the front end person, and so on. So we really like to learn together as a team. I think when we get good at doing that, that's the ultimate collaboration. It's something worth.
Yeah, that's actually one of the arguments I use, Rolf, to also explain this to managers. Why is this important? You have the ability to take on maybe junior developers and make them part of your process, right? And they have the ability to learn really fast compared to, a different way of working.
Yeah. So there's a weird thing that happens when you have junior people on the team that a lot of senior people don't get the experience of until they do it. So I'm going to tell a quick story from 20 years ago, almost exactly. I was working with a company trying to, I was just a software developer, but I turned into the lead software developer, probably because I was older than everyone else, and that they somehow think that means I'm better at what I'm doing. I don't know. And so I was a lead developer, but this is a company where they didn't allow pair programming. They didn't allow it because they thought it was ineffective, that you had to have 2 people doing the work of 1 person. So it was time to cut costs at the company. They had a forced layoff, and every department had to lay off essentially 2% or so of their workers. And because I was the highest paid employee in that group, I got the honor of being one of the people being laid off. So they assigned a junior person to work with me so I could hand off what I was working on to this junior person. And after the first hour or two, we had 2 weeks to do this. After the first hour or two, I realized that me showing this person stuff wasn't so good. Let's switch places. They sat down at the computer and I guided them through. This was like an early experience of what I would consider driver navigator pair programming, where we kind of follow the thing of if an idea is in someone's head, it has to go into the computer through someone else's hands. So they sat down at the computer, and as I guided them through, they started, as they were learning rather rapidly, they started saying, could we try this instead? And things like that. And I was learning from that junior person as much as they were learning from me. At the end of 2 weeks, we each said to each other, I wish we would have been allowed to work this way the whole time. Because we both had learned so much in just 2
And I think the other effect actually would be that you also have the ability to take a holiday without having that fear of, things are going to fall down and not continue because I'm not there. I think that's pretty great with my program.
Yeah. Documentation. Now I need to document everything because I'm going to go sick or holiday, and then suddenly documentation is important, let's put it between quotes.
And going home with, I accomplished something. I think maybe that's even the biggest one, right? So every day you go home, you finish something. I think that's actually great, just having that feeling.
Yes. Yeah, so this is about morale, really, as much as anything else. I've worked at places. I remember one place, the boss came to me one day and he said, boy, everybody just seems to be so depressed. How do we increase the morale around here? I said, this was my honest opinion at the time, and it's grown as being my go-to opinion on this. I told him, let's just have a success. Let's stop trying to do everything let's find one thing we can accomplish and let's get that done. And then let's pick another thing and get that done. So that was 2004 or 5 that happened for me. And that everything got better by doing that. It's like, yeah, we need constant little success. You know, you guys probably remember watching movies about World War One. You know, that you're in the audience. Some people may have still been alive at that time. Probably not in software development. But you see these movies of men sitting in the mud and shells and stuff coming over them. If they pop their head out, they get a bullet through the head. How easy is it to keep your morale up if you're doing that week after week after month after month? You trudge through the mud 2 yards in that direction, and then the next week you get pushed back 2 yards. I looked at software development projects. I said, this is like an old-time World War I movie where the guys were stuck in the trenches. Like, nobody is making progress, and they're all spending most of their energy keeping from going crazy rather than doing the work, you know? So, yeah, my argument is, we need those little successes, and we get them moment by moment with mob programs.
So one more question. Do you think this is limited to software development? Because I think all these principles apply everywhere, right? You even gave the example of the emergency room.
Yeah. So, this is the thing. We flip it over with software development. Matter of fact, my beginning of this journey, I worked with a team, my first contract doing software development for a company other than my own little company, where I wrote software for us to use. I now was writing software for other people to use. That first experience was a 3-month contract where the team understood extreme programming in 1999. And I was exposed to the idea of working as a team. Now, they didn't work as a team like mob programming, but everybody sat in the same room. They were constantly conferring with each other. The main designer or the main code expert who was designing the architect interacted with the team all day long or frequently throughout the day. I said, boy, I like this software development. What a great world. I'm switching from my owning this business to doing this for a living. And then my next contract was the opposite. I went into a group with 200 people, software developers. They just hired them. They were, it's a typical old-fashioned project. You're going to work in phases. When it came to phase where they're going to do the software development, they hired 200 developers. And then they put them on teams, but most of the teams worked in their own cubicles. I was very fortunate. I was one of the last hires, and joined a team that they didn't have any more cubicles for. So they took a little conference room and they put us all in the little conference room. So you picture a conference table with the computers all the way around, and we're all sitting kind of in our own space, but we were really in a team space. So this is what I noticed, though. Everybody was on a team, and they didn't do anything that resembled being on a team. Like if you went to play your football game and you said, okay, here's our team, you go play on that field, you go play on that field, we're not playing as a team.
Just a group of individuals in the same place.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of people who have the same boss or work on the same kind of thing. We weren't really working as teams. I think that this idea of teams in software development was neglected. So I saw it. This is exactly what I did. I started thinking, I don't like this. I liked that first job. How do I make it more like the first job, where everybody was interacting a lot and we were getting a lot done? We were actually getting an extreme amount done on that job. They were taking huge problems and having them done within a week or less. And here we were just, we were trudging through, slogging through the mud, as I was saying earlier. So I think other fields, this was to answer that question. In other fields I had worked in, people did work as a team. I was a contractor for a while, doing contracting work in the sign industry. And I owned my own little company. When a group would go out to install signage on a big building, they go and work as a team. You don't send the crane operator out and they do their work, and then you send out the electrician and they do their work. It's like they all have to be there together working as a team. Stop and watch somebody doing a critical road work where they're replacing some big equipment under the earth, and you can see it looks like everybody's just standing around. But they need to have each one of those people. This is about flow. They have to have each one of those people there so they can do their task at just the right moment. So if the welder's not there when the thing's put in place to weld, we now have introduced huge cycle time. So this is the whole idea. Why don't we have that teamwork in software development that many other, like the surgery team, you brought together? So this is about the holistic focus. They're all focused on the well-being of this one patient, but they've all brought different skills together. And I talked to a surgeon about this once, and I said, on TV, you put out your hand, you say scalpel, and they give you a scalpel. And you say, suture, or whatever it is you ask for, scissors. I don't know what they ask for. Okay, is that the way that it's done? And he said, well, no, actually, when I work with my team, when I put out my hand, they put the tool I need into my hand. If the patient's having a bit of a increased heart rate, they alert me to that. And we are working together, focused on our holistic well-being of this patient, but with our own specialties. This is the same kind of idea. Why don't we do it in software development? But I have seen, like I've worked with a QA team once that was doing inspections of physical devices rather than inspections of software development. And they didn't work as a team. A complaint would come in like these pieces aren't fitting together. They need to go out and measure the equipment, make sure that some, part of it isn't going out of alignment, whatever it is. They would do it individually. The tickets would come in, a person would be assigned the ticket, and they would go do the work. I worked with this team just a little bit. They had seen us working in our software, doing software this way, and they modified their work to match the software, the mob programming. They put up some big screens so everybody could see what everybody was working on. And they started, as a ticket come in, they would discuss it as a team, and they might even work on it as a team. Now, some things you don't need that for. You just need somebody to go check the temperature on a machine. But that tells us something. We should have that machine automatically detecting its own temperature. So that becomes a team-level problem instead of the individual machine-level problem. If a team says, let's elevate this to the problem to solve is how do we make it where that data is automatically generated instead of humans having to do it. Team-level problems are where we want our brains to be. I turn around and showed you a book a minute ago. This book is about that. Amy Edmondson's book, Teaming. Teaming is about the future of work is going to be problems that one person can't solve. We're already into that space. We no longer have individual problems. You rarely go to a company anymore and find, like in your average business, they used to have mathematicians. They took care of making sure calculations were correct and that sort of thing. We do a lot of that work, on our phone nowadays. We have applications that do the calculations for us. We just have to put in the parameters. So, we've changed the nature of work, and a lot of the easy stuff is now automated.
I do have one question because I think we are also... but okay. Last question for me, because we had this recently. Have you thought about a different name for mob programming? Because sometimes people hear like product owners or scrum masters or managers, and they see programming, automatically they disqualify anything. And I was like, wow, what if the name was something else? I don't know exactly what, but like, have you thought about it and why mob?
Yes. So, first of all, the term mob programming came from a paper that was written in 2001 or 2 from the Extreme Programming Conference. They used to make a book at the end of the conference. They'd gather all the papers and research and put it into a book. And I think the book was called Extreme Programming Perspectives. And of course, extreme programming itself, it's like, what's that mean? So that term got into my vocabulary whenever I was working with more than a pair. And I used to say when I would do a coding dojo at a user group, I would use a sentence that went something like this: I'd like us to work all together. It's like a pair programming, but with 5 people, kind of like a mob. And so that just was a sort of a joke, because that would lead into this next sentence. I would say, but we don't want the chaos of a mob. So, this is mob programming. So we have the 2 sides to it. So I don't care what you call it. I want to be really clear. Call it whatever works for you. We don't need to have the same term used everywhere for this thing. It's what works for you. It was meant as a kind of a joke to say, we're going to be like a mob, and then we picture it's chaotic. So if we think of a mob being like in France during the Revolution, and everybody takes to the streets, and they're carrying their pitchforks and their torches. This is the picture we get from the movies. That can be thought of as a mob. But I like to think of it this way. A mob is a group of people who've come together to take action on something important that they couldn't do alone. So that's also kind of the idea of a team. So originally, when we started talking about this in public, I called it whole team programming. It's whole team programming. But now we have to think about the other word. Is it programming? Now, I like to think of it as being development. Yes. Whole team development. So development is more than just writing the code. Development includes the conception. It includes discovery. It includes creating the environment. It includes all the things that we do to end up with a product that we want to deliver. That's the development. So I think I would prefer to call it whole team development. But if you were to say to a product owner or a business owner, we're going to do team development, they think you're going to go off-site and do some exercises where you swing on ropes and you help each other get over a wall and all this kind of stuff. We're developing the team. So, there's no perfect name for any of these things. I think pair programming really had it made because it's two people, it's a pair, and they're there. So it's an easy word.
So
I've seen the word ensemble used, and I kind of like it. I've seen, of course, I like the idea of team, but I don't know. I'll let the world decide what they want to call it, and then someday, that's what everybody will be calling.
Can I ask one last question, because you just raised this point?
All right, guys. Well, I'm sorry to say that I have run out of time. I need to jet. I need to leave right about now. I have some prior engagements that I just cannot delay anymore.
Okay, so...
Thanks for joining us. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Rolf.
Yeah, we continue.
No, man, enjoy your weekend.
Woody, it's been an honor to have you on the show. And
sure.
You guys can continue the conversation right here. And I'm going to check you guys later.
We might be.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah, if you need to leave, Woody, that's also fine, right? But you triggered me.
Well, yeah, I'm perfectly fine. I set aside a time for this, and my goal right now was to serve you with in the best way I can. So whatever we do.
Thank you. You triggered me, right? Because you're saying, well, this is about the whole process. This is development, and so I think that could be an interesting question as well. Does a team like this still require the typical backlog, all the grooming, all the I won't give judgment.
But do you use the term can of worms?
Yeah, of course. So, but right, we need a bit of passion as well in this podcast. So
I would argue this. Most of what we do in creating software is waste. So I would argue that the term grooming is not considered appropriate in a lot of cultures. So there's another one of those words. Here's the thing. We are doing work at the incorrect time when we do things like a product backlog. A product backlog, first of all, the term backlog sort of indicates this is stuff we're eventually going to do. Where I like to think of it more like this. We've got this pile. Think of a pile of straw.
Yeah.
Like the old-fashioned idea of find the needle in the haystack. The needle's what's important. The hay, not so important. We're trying to find the needle. So we should be focused on developing ways or finding a process or a way of working or way of thinking that helps us identify the needles faster and easier and better. So I think of this project being like a pile of hay. An example I like to use is we need a new reporting system. Our reporting system isn't working very good. So then somebody's going to sit and envision what a better reporting system is like. They're going to have a lot of meetings. In the old phased approach, that would have happened. In agile software development, I still see it happening a lot. I don't think it's really I don't think it should be part of it. I think we could take the term. We need a better reporting system, and then we can just work with that. So we don't need that list of requirements.
Actually,
all we need to do.
I would argue, what is a better reporting system? What are you trying to achieve here?
So that's the beginning right there. That's exactly the beginning right there. We could say, this isn't working. What's not working about it? And that's where we start. we don't need to conceptualize. As a matter of fact, I've seen so many failed projects where they said this old thing isn't working anymore. We need to replace it.
Been there, done that.
Oh yeah, quite a few times. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my preferred way in working with those kinds of things is, in a very iterative manner, which is, I think, so before Agile software development, they were trying to come up with these different lighter weight processes, and one of them was called Iterative Incremental Development. I may have that backwards, IID. Yeah. Iterative or Incremental Iterative Development. I'm not sure what the order was, but we're going to do little bits, and we're going to do this over and over again. We're just going to add, change, modify, replace little bits, and that works really well. It was one of the precursors to the idea of Agile. So we need to really understand anything that we do, where does it fit on that value stream map? Is it value adding or is it not? And if it's an easy example to talk about would be a bug. So you have a bug and you need to fix it. Now bugs themselves are an ultimate waste. So I would consider them maybe like they talk about it in a call center. It's this is waste we created for ourselves. It's self-induced pain. So what if we had a process that mostly got rid of that, and that's the idea of zero bugs, or part of it. But so how are we going to get to where we don't have these wastes? So let's look at this in the bug. The first thing is somebody identifies the bug, and that's value added, so to speak, because we don't want the bug. Now they have to document it. So that documentation itself might be a waste, because the existence of a document tells us we don't have a more direct way to communicate. So this is part of the problem of software development. We think that we need to document it so somebody can work on it at a different time. So they submit it into a bug tracking system. So we've introduced waste. So the identifying of the bug is adding value, but we have to question, is the document of it adding value? Is your end customer, do they want to pay for you documenting this? They just want the bug fixed. So this is a much bigger concept, but let's go along this path. So we've took the time of documenting. Let's say it is adding value, but now we put it into the queue of the system, and it's going to wait till somebody picks it up out of the queue. That is waiting. That's wasted time. And when they pick it up, they're now working on it. They read it. That's adding value. They're getting an understanding. Did they need this process to do it? We maybe could have a better process. But once they've read it, they go, that looks like it's going to be high priority. So I'm going to put it in the triage meeting as one of the priorities. So the prioritization process might have been work, but now we're waiting till the triage meeting. If it happens every day, we're only waiting a few hours. But a few hours every day is a huge waste. So now we're in the triage meeting. We pick it up. Somebody explains it. We go, oh, have you reproduced it yet? No, we haven't. So we assign it to somebody to reproduce it. So it goes back into a queue. And maybe the team that does the reproducing of the, making the bug show up, they maybe have to schedule for that. So all this time can be compressed. We can get rid of all those tiny steps. And all we need to do, the real value adding is the discovery, the understanding of it, maybe trying to reproduce it, and then somebody actually fixing it, making sure it works, and deploying it. If you could remove all the waiting time out of that, you can compress this down to a very small amount of time.
So what is your your theory of like why software development became the way how it is? Why didn't we start just doing exactly how you described? Why did we have to go for this whole, let's say, right side of things to basically come to the conclusion that, okay, this is kind of wrong?
Yeah.
Do you have like a vision on this?
So, first of all, I will always insult somebody in everything I say, so I apologize for whoever I'm going to insult here. I started out my career as a kid, as an employee at a place. I was 12 or 13 years old. I won't go into details. I've told that story before. But I had a boss who was really great. And he kind of ruined me for bosses, because after that moment, I thought all bosses were like my first boss. And he basically understood how to take advantage of the brain power of everybody on his team. I was a 12 or 13-year-old boy, and yet he knew how to get me involved in continuous improvement. This was a long time ago. We weren't talking about these things. I don't know where he learned this stuff. Maybe it's just human nature. So let's get to this. The issue here is that after that moment, every job I went to fell short of my original boss, who I had for like 5 years. I'm going, why are they doing things the way that they're doing them? I started questioning that. I would notice a wasteful process and go to my boss, and they would tell me something like, hey, you're not being paid to think, just get your work done. It's like, boy, we could get things so much better. So now I'm going to insult managers here.
Go for it.
It's kind of like, managers manage. That's the whole problem. It's like in the internet, they'll say, well, haters are haters. Haters will hate, So this is the problem. We need to step out. There's these different, I would call them realms. You could think of systems as being a system is within a bigger system is within a bigger system. When we get down to the system of work that we're using, we're actually inside some kind of a system of management. And then we're inside some kind of system of the organization. And we're probably then inside some kind of a system of purpose. And maybe then outside of that is some kind of a system of reality or a system of what's going on that we're existing within. So like all of these things bring us, cause their own problems. Something that shows up as a symptom within the system of work usually gets handled as a symptom. We are often dealing with symptoms instead of problems. We deal with the symptom. And I think this is a big problem of the misplaced focus of management. So part of that misplaced focus of management is that they're focused on making it, pardon me, I've got to hit a button here.
Yep. No,
sorry for that ringing. I always leave this on, but it's today I'm expecting a delivery that they say that I need to go outside and help them unload something.
I am getting curious what you ordered.
So here's the thing, is that if we don't understand that the symptom that we're seeing is not the problem, we will come up with a solution for the symptom, and that never works. You cannot solve for a symptom. Now, let's say we get out to the problem where we actually understand the level of the problem. I would make this argument. We often can't solve the problem. We think we can. And what ends up happening is the solution to today's problem becomes tomorrow's problem. We've just moved it. If you ever seen the book Cat in the Hat, Cat in the Hat is a kid's book where this cat visits some kids who are at home alone, and they end up ends up causing a little mess, and in cleaning up that mess, he makes a bigger mess. And then in cleaning up the bigger mess, he makes an even bigger mess. This is what happens. We have this, so the big problem comes in this way, I think. If the focus of management is solving these problems, the big problem they often see is, boy, it's hard to manage things. So they start focusing on how do we make it easier to manage things, which is a misplaced focus. This is a huge problem. We think we need to make it easier to manage when we would get a huge benefit if we just simply found a way to make it easier for everybody to do their job. And I would put it this way. If we made it easy for everyone to excel in their work and in their life, things would be so much better. But instead we focus on controlling it, and we need to focus on liberating people. Most of our energy as workers doing our job is wasted on protecting ourselves from the nonsense that's going on around us, which is being created by other people who are merely protecting themselves from the nonsense that's going on around them. And that goes up to the management.
So it's no longer about
there's a division.
It's no longer about getting the results, the actual thing that the whole company started in the first place for. Yeah.
Well, so we're really going into some deep stuff here. The problem of the results of the company is in the domain of the purpose. So that's levels way out. I think it's Deming. Was it Deming who had the quote, if you give a manager a numeric goal, they will destroy the company to reach that goal. We don't understand. We're managing for the wrong thing when we give a manager a numeric goal. They will become territorial. They'll protect their budget against the rest of the company's budgets. They will make it harder for other teams to get their work done. I worked at a company once where they really need to cut costs, so they cut costs, and it ended up hampering each of the teams that were trying to generate income. Which is more important, lower costs or more income? There's a balance in there that we have to really realize in software development. Being really effective at software development is way more better, way more improved than trying to become effective at cutting costs. The generation is like miles beyond. It's different. Like I was in several companies when I was younger where it was really about the pennies. Could you cut your costs enough to keep yourself profitable? Because it was one of these commodity style businesses. But you get into software development, that's not a commodity style business. It's definitely a creative discovery generating, value generating industry.
Exactly.
So there we go. But so management focusing on making it easy to manage. Now another quote from Peter Drucker this time. When a manager can't, that's from Russell Acuff. The manager can't, let's start with Peter Drucker quote. Which kind of tells it most of what we consider management is simply making it harder for people to do their work. And the Russell Acuff quote is, if we can't measure what matters, then what we can measure becomes what matters. And that's, I'm paraphrasing these things. This is what ends up happening. As we manage, we're managing for, OKRs or whatever it is, whatever the abbreviations are for these things. The measurements become what's important, not the actual purpose. And maybe the purpose has to be much bigger than this company makes a profit. I think the purpose of every company should be, we've made the world a better place. We've made it better for the people working within the company and better for the people working that exist outside the company. How are we making things better? It's not about income. And those who are focused on making a lot of money will take shortcuts that end up with deceptive practices and much worse things, self-deceptive things that we do. I've worked in companies where it was clear that the salespeople were doing things that were illegal to get their commissions. They had no other way to make a living in that company, so they resorted to things that I would consider unethical, and I'm not willing to work in.
So would you say that mob program is one small step to actually change the way how companies work?
So it's the things that led to mob programming that I think are important. Mob programming itself was just turning up the good on collaborating within the development of software. Most companies that need to have software developers on hand will benefit from this idea of learning to better collaborate. But mob programming existed within or originated within an environment where what my goal was, I had two goals. I very rarely share this. One of them was I want to have a place where the people who are working here are really happy to be working.
I like that, yeah.
And so that to me was more important than being great at doing the software development, because I'm pretty certain that when we solve for that, we end up getting better software development. When we solve for that, where everybody's engaged and interested and enjoying their lives, we get a better result. The flip side of that, or I should say, in correlation with that, is I want to have a company where other people, I want to be working in a firm where other people want to come to work there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I figured those were kind of that was my main management, was do the employees, when a job opening happened, immediately go and call their friends and say, oh, we got an opening, please apply for this. That's what I kind of wanted to see. So that would be how I could judge, am I creating this environment where people can excel in their life? I can't solve all their problems, but these ideas I've watched being applied by others in companies, and it always turns out well. Now, your profit margins are a result of this goodness. They can also be the result of doing unethical things. I'd rather be in the company where we're doing ethical things.
Same here.
And so what was I trying to put in place? And I'm going to be really clear here. Whatever ideas I had were all theoretical, and I had enough experience with them over 20 years leading up to it. Really over my entire work career of 50 or 55 years by now, but at the 50-year mark, I had accumulated a lot of bad things I'd done and a lot of things that I did to try and move past those to learn how to be a good boss and a good employer and a good worker too. I understood a couple things, and the main two were if we make it easy for people to excel in their work, that creates a great environment. And if we always are looking for what's going well and how do we get more of that, which I now call turn up the good, those are the things I brought to the organization where we originated this way of working. Now, let's talk about originated. I think many other teams were also working this way. They just weren't as focused on it as we became. I've worked at a lot of places where they would gather a team together in an emergency, and then they would split it apart. And I've asked a lot of people about it because they'll come up to me after I do a conference talk and say, hey, we've been doing something like this for years. And they explain to me it's pretty much when an emergency happens or a big problem happens, they bring everybody together. And then when it's resolved, they work apart. So I've dug into it quite a bit. They often mean they bring everybody together for lots of meetings, but they still usually work individually to do the work, but they're constantly feeding back to each other or responding to each other. So it's close to what mob programming is, but not really. Sometimes they are all working at one screen. But then I will ask them, well, why didn't you just keep doing that if that solved the big problem? It's like, well, there's two common answers. We really prefer being alone, is one I would hear, which tells us we got to make this a better experience. You know, how do we make it a good experience? And the other was, they said that, well, we solved the big problem. We don't need all that much brain power on the smaller problems. So both of those, I think, are probably not legitimate reasons. I think that if we are finding we are deluged with small problems, we need to figure out how to deal with that. I think in software development, we shouldn't be wasting our time on the stuff that we could learn to automate. Or, you know, like what we used to do a lot of was, boy, we're writing this some similar code over and over again. Let's write an object, you know, that allows us to create a menu by just configuring some stuff in the code. Then we get rid of having to write those menus. That in the earlier days, you know, you had to write a menu that was at the bottom of every screen in the old, you know, days of DOS, you know, pre-Windows kind of stuff. You know, you saw that code over and over again. Well, you can automate that in a way by writing something that you never need to write again.
Exactly.
So anyways, yeah, go ahead.
I think
keep me on
it's
track.
like, for me, it has been like a very nice, interesting discussion. I'm pretty sure we can go on and on and on because I have a lot of questions. But, well, I'm meeting you again next week as you are doing a workshop for a few of our customers. So then, well, I guess if we also had more questions from other listeners. But, well, Rolf left because he had to go. So bad planning from our side. But, yes, I would like to thank you a lot for joining us today. And I hope to have you soon again to discuss not per se only about mobbing, right, but also about the visions of how this companies goes. And we do share a very passionate topic about no estimation. I'm definitely on that category, and I know you are there too. So, yeah, I hope to have you soon again to have this conversation in a different level.
Oh, it's my honor. If you want to have me back, it would be quite an honor. If you've not gotten sick with this already.
No, not me. So that's up to the listeners.
So many more questions. Actually, I am going to ask one more question. Have you ever read the books by Patrick Lencioni, the stuff about organizational clarity and stuff?
Oh,
because
yeah.
I really think it links up with this, right? We've been trying to integrate as well.
Yeah, so that's the five dysfunctions of a team.
That's one of his books, but he wrote a few more. It's about, eliminating the organizational silos and in the end about how do you set up purpose or rallying cry that will unite the company. And I think that stuff is great to me.
Yeah, I'm fully on board with that as well. I don't know if I've read all of his books because I think I've read 3. I know I've read 2. I think I've read 3. So if there's more than that, now I got to add that.
I will send you the title. I think you'll love it. Yeah.
So there is lots of growth that we can do in our companies towards the idea of collaboration and mob programming. The concepts of mob programming are one way to go about doing it and are applicable in many different disciplines. So this is great to have this opportunity to meet with you and chat with you, and I hope your listeners do enjoy.
I think they will for sure.
Yeah, love talking to you again. Thank you very much.
And see you next week.
And Henrique, I'll see you, I guess, next week. Yeah, absolutely.
Doei.
Thank you much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Scoutcast, Roasting Marshmallows, with your host, Rolf Surd. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit forscouts.nl and on Twitter @forscouts. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on Scoutcast, Roasting Marshmallows.